Okay, so in this video, I'm going to cover how to master the ITTOs for the PMP and CAPM exams. But before I get started, I wanted to mention that if you're interested in some free PMP or CAPM prep materials, you can go over to projectprep.org. We've got a bunch over there for you. Cheat sheets, full-length practice tests, note cards, you name it. There's a ton of stuff there. It's going to include several things that will be helpful or that we'll discuss during the video. So there's a process reference, an ITTO spreadsheet, some note cards to help you study, and some blank sheets you can use to practice writing the ITTOs to help you remember them. Okay, so there's two topics we're going to cover. First is just what are the ITTOs, and then how do I master them. So we'll start with the ITTOs first, just an overview. But before I do that, it makes sense at this point to talk about what processes are. So in the PMBOK guide, there's 49 processes, and these are things we do in project management. Some examples of those processes include things like develop schedule, estimate cost, define scope, and so on. There's 49 of these. And each of these processes have ITTOs, inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. Now the ITTOs are kind of like the recipes for project management. And you can think about it this way. If there's a process we perform to make bread, we've got inputs like flour, tools and techniques that we use, and then the output that we hope to achieve this delicious bread. And so we've got a process, inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. So an example from the PMBOK looks like this. So there's the develop project management plan process, and one of the inputs is the project charter. One of the tools or techniques are facilitation, and the output is the project management plan. And so there's actually a lot of ITTOs, and it can be overwhelming. But we've got several tips here to help you master them. And the key here is mastery. It's not memorization. It's not like you have to memorize all the ITTOs. It's not really effective. But these are some tips to help you master and remember them for the exam. Okay, so here are the 5 tips. First, know their purpose. Understand why each ITTO is needed. Write them down. And then master the ITTOs for 2 processes a day. Learn the common ITTOs, and then understand the patterns for each process. And so let me break down each of these in a little more detail. First, know their purpose. If you understand why an ITTO is needed, it's easier to associate it with a process. So here's an example. If you think about a baking process, let's go back to that. You might ask yourself, okay, what is an egg? And why do I need that to help me make cookies? If you understand why those are helpful, it becomes easier to remember which ITTO goes with which process. So here's an example. So you might ask yourself, okay, what is the project charter? That's an input to the process we talked about earlier. And why do I need that project charter to help me create the project management plan? So ask yourself as you look at these ITTOs, what is this thing and why do I need it? Okay, here's the second tip, write them down. Writing helps us learn and remember things, and I think it's helpful here even though there's lots of ITTOs. And so we've got blank sheets over at projectprep.org to help you with that. I suggest printing these out, going through each process, writing the inputs, the tools and techniques, and outputs, and it just helps you remember them, and you'll start to see some patterns there too. A lot of the ITTOs are repeated. They're used in multiple processes, and you'll understand that clearly as you start writing these down. Okay, here's the third tip. Master 2 processes a day, or the ITTOs for 2 processes a day. Then each day, review what you already studied, and then master 2 more. Okay, so we've got note cards over at projectprep.org that should help with this. Just take 2 a day, take them around to the doctor's office, to work, wherever you go, and just study them when you have a chance. So here's the 4th tip. Learn the common ITTOs. So ITTOs oftentimes reappear in several processes, and in some cases, almost every process. And so here's a list of all the ITTOs that appear in 10 or more processes. And let's just take a look at inputs for a second. So organizational process assets and the project management plan are on 47 of 49 processes, almost every one. So if you get a question about whether or not one of those is on a given process, you can be pretty confident that's true. Now, you don't have to keep coming back to this video. We have an ITTO spreadsheet on projectprep.org, where one of the tabs has all of those stats with the common ITTOs in it. That's going to be a good reference for you. So here's the 5th tip. Understand the ITTO patterns. And you don't have to memorize these patterns. They're on the ITTO spreadsheet. There's a tab that has them all listed. Okay, here's the first pattern. outputs often become inputs to later processes. So here's an example. We have the plan scope management process, and an output of that is the requirements management plan. That plan is going to become an input to collect requirements. So outputs kind of roll down to become inputs of later processes in many cases. Here's the second pattern. Inputs and outputs are often documents, and tools and techniques are often actions. So look at this process. Identify stakeholders. We have the project charter, which is a document, as an input, meetings, which are an action, as a tool and technique, and the stakeholder register, which is a document also, which is an output. So inputs and outputs are often documents, and tools and techniques are often actions. Okay, so the next few patterns go back to the common ITTOs and talk about the common inputs, tools and techniques, and outputs. So the third pattern is the PMP is an input to nearly every process, 47 to 49. So here's an example of that in plan scope management. Okay, the fourth pattern is about organizational process assets and enterprise environmental factors. Those are also two common inputs which appear on most processes. An example here is the create WBS process. Okay, here's the fifth pattern. This is about tools and techniques, the common ones. We've got expert judgment, data analysis, and meetings. Those three are going to appear on most. And the planned stakeholder engagement process, that's an example of that. You'll see expert judgment and meetings there. Now for the sixth pattern, these are the common outputs: project document updates and PMP updates. The first is on 39 processes, the second on 26. Here's an example of that, the monitor and control project work. You're going to see both of those as outputs. Okay, as a related pattern, this is sort of similar to pattern 6. Anything that includes updates on it will always be an output, never an input or a tool. So here's an example of that. This is the monitor and control project work process. You've got the project management plan as an input, and as an output, you have project management plan updates. So anytime you see that word updates, it's going to be an output, never an input or a tool and technique. Okay, here's the eighth pattern. Anything that includes system will always be a tool, never an input or an output. So here's an example of that. We've got sequence activities. We've got this thing called the Project Management Information System, going to be right in the middle there. Okay, here's the ninth pattern. Individual plans are an output of what I call plan blank processes, like plan scope management, plan quality management, and so on. Individual plans. So here's an example of that with the plan scope management process. It's plan blank management, and so the scope management plan and the requirements management plan are going to be outputs. Okay, here's the 10th pattern. Work performance data is an input to monitoring processes. So as we monitor a project, we need data to help us do that. And so here's control scope. That's a monitoring process. And so you're going to see work performance data as an input. And the 11th pattern is kind of an add-on to that. Change requests and work performance information are outputs on those same processes, those monitoring processes. So we're taking work performance data and turning it into work performance information. And based on our analysis, a change request may be needed if something's not going right on the project. Okay, here's a recap of those 5 tips. Know the purpose of the ITTOs, write them down, master the ITTOs for 2 processes a day, learn the common ITTOs, and understand the patterns. So just as a reminder, if you go to projectprep.org, we've got a ton of free prep materials, including the ones that we've talked about in the video, the process reference, the ITTO spreadsheet, note cards, and those blank ITTO sheets.